Every day in this country, we are told by the mainstream media, by the left-wing media, by the online left media, and by the lefty activists that we are consistently under threat of right-wing extremism, that the right-wing extremists are ready to attack, and we see every now and again there's some arrests made or there's actually a dramatic incident of right-wing extremism that gets inflated, broadcast out to the world, and it is pictured as this definitely representative thing of the right wing. Even though nobody in right-wing politics endorses any of these attacks, much of these attacks aren't even politically motivated. They have to be manufactured, twisted, and churned in order to make them politically motivated, and a bunch of them turn out to be FBI plots where all of the key figures in the situation actually work for the FBI. So they basically entrapped the 1 or 2 out of 25 people that are involved in this case into actually doing that, and some of these cases actually get beaten with the entrapment defense when you take it to a court of law. Now, as this talk becomes more commonplace, as this narrative becomes more prominent in left-wing media and in left-wing circles, a lot of people have pointed out the clear and obvious thing, which is that we're seeing a giant increase in radical left-wing violence, and unlike the violence that can be attributed to the right wing that isn't endorsed by anybody serious on the right wing, mainstream democratic institutions, the democratic media, and the left on the internet.com all seem to be in support of this. And a perfect example of this is a story that the left-wing media has tried to dismiss from the headlines of a leftist activist angry about abortion and gun control attempting to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. Now, we're going to go over this case. We're going to go over the reaction to this case, and we're going to discuss how the left wing endorses this political violence. Not all of them, but a notable amount of them. But first, we got an ad. It's Noble Gold. We're going to throw it over to Noble Gold and then come back to the other side. With inflation at 8.5% or maybe even higher, don't you think it's a good time to secure some of your assets and start hedging against inflation? Don't you think that maybe playing everything in the market is not the best idea? This is why I recommend you go over to noblegoldinvestments.com and think about starting a precious metals IRA. And luckily for you guys out there in my audience, if you go to noblegoldinvestments.com or call them at 877-646-5347, you listen to their experts and you decide to put a qualifying investment into Noble Gold, then you will receive as a gift a 3-ounce American Virtue coin, which is absolutely beautiful. And again, it is free with a qualifying account with them. Amazing in every possible way. noblegoldinvestments.com. Check it out today. Now, you may have missed, because the mainstream media is trying to bury this, the story of a left-wing activist going from California to the state of Virginia in order to attempt to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh at his home, which of course the address was published by left-wing activists in a story that we covered previously, where I talked about how you're basically making members of the Supreme Court vulnerable to violence, and people who were out there that were involved, the activists, were actually calling for Kavanaugh to feel threatened and feel the weight of political violence. So this was something that the left wing engineered, cheered on when people showed up to the houses, and then people were against that and they were calling that out. They were like, no, they deserve to be uncomfortable. You don't get to have a safe household.
You don't get to take away my bodily autonomy and enjoy your Saturday night at home. You can do one or the other.
First stop, Justice Brett Kavanaugh's home, where they were greeted by Montgomery County police officers.
And of course, this led to obvious results, doxing federal officials and saying that they're responsible for taking your rights. Federal officials that you've smeared in the past as a gang rapist without any evidence would obviously lead to this result, but most of the left wing ignored that because it was a conservative justice. Therefore, the same rules don't apply. Therefore, who cares about our institutions? Go threaten all the Supreme Court justices that you actually want. So based on the fact that his address was put out there in the public, based on the fact that lefties were giving directions to his address, how to approach his house, and all of that, and this was endorsed by Planned Parenthood and all these left-wing organizations, this guy shows up ready to kill Brett Kavanaugh, and thankfully he was in fact arrested for trying to do this assassination. Now, I just want to point out that the reason why he was targeting Brett Kavanaugh is actually quite interesting, because as we know, based on his confirmation hearing, Kavanaugh was the most smeared Supreme Court justice probably in American history, because the left didn't want him to get that spot, so they labeled him a gang rapist and all this other stuff. They trotted out all these different accusers, all these felonious allegations, and all of a sudden you you saw the people who made these allegations not really be present in the public eye anymore. After Kavanaugh was confirmed, it's just, oh, well, whatever, we just left that out there on the internet.com. But the reason why this is important is because Kavanaugh was, in fact, targeted due to that, among many other things. Because if you think about it, the most ideologically consistent members of the Supreme Court starts and ends with Clarence Thomas, and everybody else is kind of secondary. If you're going to go after somebody that is opposed to the left-wing ideology the most, it would likely not be Brett Kavanaugh, but they went after Kavanaugh because Kavanaugh has been demonized in the media like few other Supreme Court justices in American history. Secondly, this guy was all hopped up on hysteria related to abortion laws. And remember, he was from California, aka a place where abortion would not become illegal, and there's basically no chance of the state legislature of California doing anything but expanding access to abortion. I think they were trying to say that they're going to pass laws where they will pay for people's abortions that are out of state in response to this, and yet this guy, all hopped up on hysteria because of that leaked Supreme Court decision, was going to take out a Supreme Court justice so that way he could preserve women's rights. And what's great about this is that this is another consequence of the leaking of this draft decision. Unprecedented maneuver. It was leaked over a month ago. Somehow the FBI or any federal law enforcement agency, even though they can track down all the people who were even vaguely near the Capitol on January 6th. Where were you January 6th? I was in a car dealership trying to buy a car, and the guy was trying to tell me that frame damage actually isn't a big deal. That frame damage comes from parallel parking. And when I was telling him that no, frame damage is a big deal, no, that doesn't happen from parallel parking, I looked up on the TV and what did I see? Our republic getting frame damage. Where were you January? Where were you January? Where were you January? Where were you where were you January 6th? Let me know down in the comments down in the comments below. Where were you? Where were you? But for some reason they can't find the person who leaked this memo, even though the pool of people is about 41. 9 Supreme Court justices, 4 staff members each that would have had access to this, leaked out into the public over a month later. No way that they can find out who did this or why or anything like that. It's just not really that good. I mean, even if you were to narrow it to just the staffers of the 4 lefty Supreme Court justices, then that would only leave you with 16 possible options, but the FBI can't be bothered to do that, and they can't do that. No. It's not a big deal, because what's really matters is that we know how bad the Republicans are, and that they're considering overturning Roe versus Wade. Look at the draft decision and let the outrage and hysteria emerge. Now, the reason I brought up the response to right-wing violence, and specifically the response to January 6th, where were you January 6th? Where were you January 6th? Where were you January 6th? Is because the reaction is absolutely amazing when you compare the two. So whenever a right-wing person does any kind of violence, people tend to disavow it. Whenever somebody is vaguely on the right wing and they do any kind of violence, it is disavowed from top to bottom, as it should. We should not be promoting political violence. We should not be promoting killing or injuring or assassinating people that you disagree with, especially when the whole process of getting Roe versus Wade overturned was the Republicans working for decades in the process in order to get the nominations to the court. So going through the system, doing it the proper way, appears to work, while political violence, just from a pragmatic sense, not to mention the obvious moral reprehensible nature of political violence, is disastrous, especially for people on the right wing. Where would the left wing be without using January 6th? It's their only thing that they can talk about, even though comparatively it's about the 397th most violent riot within the 6-month span of that event. The George Floyd riots were significantly worse, but the left wing obviously has double standards because they are not willing to condemn or even acknowledge the violence on their side. And a perfect example of this is a CNN host, a legal analysis, talking about how this attempted assassination on Brett Kavanaugh, due to the fact that this person was a leftist that was angry about abortion and gun control, events hyped up by the left wing, is somehow indication of how both sides, especially the right-wing side, is the one producing the violence and turning up the temperature in the country. Isn't the right wing bad?
Very little detail at this point, Kate, other than to say this man is he's an adult man from California. We don't yet know what the nature of the threat was. We don't know what language the threat was or what kind of weapon this man might have had, if he had one at all, because the information at this point is just so thin. But Kate, this certainly contributes to this overall threat landscape we've been talking a lot about. The major concern here with this abortion ruling from federal officials, and they've been sounding the alarm on this for about a month, is that Supreme Court justices will certainly be, potentially targeted by violent extremists who are angered over this pending ruling that is poised to strike down Roe v. Wade. This is an extremely passionate issue. There are emotions on both sides. Federal officials have made clear over and over they believe the risk truly comes from both sides of this abortion debate. So certainly this case, really solidifying what federal officials have been warning about. People are angry. They might seek to use the abortion ruling as a justification to cause violence, and that puts these Supreme Court justices, their staffs, and other members of the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, at risk.
Now remember, protesting Congress, who you're allowed to protest, and that getting out of hand is considered a coup d'etat against the United States of America on January 6th, that fateful day. However, people showing up trying to intimidate, and ultimately the publishing of that Supreme Court justice's address leading to an attempted assassination is no big deal. It's just both sides. I mean, when the right wing does violence, it shows how violent and destructive and a threat to democracy the right wing is and how they want to undermine our institutions. But when the left wing does violence, it's ambiguous. We don't even know, honestly, but it really is indication of how both sides are getting really violent, especially people on the right wing. The right wing's bad. Pay no attention to the fact that the guy that we demonized for years was the target of this. Pay no attention to the fact that left-wing activists published this guy's address. Pay no attention to the fact that the guy behind this attempted assassination gave his motives, and they happen to be left-wing. But that, of course, is not the worst of it. Obviously, we got to go over to the Young Turks, and we got to talk about their segment that is allegedly on this attempted Kavanaugh assassination, but you'll see it goes off the rails immediately.
But what I did find was something no prayer will ever relieve.
So Cenk opens this video with testimony from a doctor on the state of some of the victims at the tragedy in Uvalde. Now, normally, this is totally fine if the topic of the story is that event. However, the topic of this story is Brett Kavanaugh, the assassination attempt on Brett Kavanaugh, and one of the reasons why this guy came from California to Kavanaugh's house to try to take his life is because he believed that Kavanaugh would be bad for gun control, and he specifically cited this shooting. So in a story about an attempt on the Supreme Court's life, Cenk is opening up with the same things that instigated this guy to go and try to take that Supreme Court justice's life. Imagine if the topic of this was Dylan Roof and his shooting, and the person doing the news segment decided to do a cold open with somebody talking about how much they don't particularly care for black churches, and here's all the problems with black churches. Wouldn't that be kind of questionable? Wouldn't that be something that would lead you to believe that maybe he doesn't care so much about the victims in the case and might be signaling agreement with the perpetrator?
So that is a doctor from Uvalde. Now, this story is about Brett Kavanaugh and how somebody might have been trying to assassinate him. So why did I bring that doctor in? Well, you're gonna see later in the story, and it's important to the story because it tells you how different Americans are treated. Well, let's find out about what happened to Kavanaugh today. So Mr. Roski told the police that he was upset about the leak of a recent Supreme Court draft decision regarding the right to abortion, as well as the recent school shootings in Uvalde, Texas. Wait a minute. You're worried about shootings and you were gonna go shoot the guy. Interesting. Roski indicated that he believed that the justice that he intended to kill would side with the Second Amendment decisions that would loosen gun control laws. Okay, let me give you more details about that irony. When authorities searched his suitcase and a backpack, they found a black tactical chest rig and a tactical knife, a pistol with 2 magazines and ammunition, pepper spray, zip ties, a hammer, a screwdriver, a nail punch, a crowbar, a pistol, light, and duct tape, in addition to other items according to that affidavit. Okay, what are you doing? What kind of an argument is we should have more gun control, so I'm gonna use a gun to kill somebody? That makes no sense at all. If you're looking at it just from a political perspective, well, what are they gonna do? Rhetorically, Fox News and all the right wing are gonna say, oh, now we're even. Yeah, people who were inspired by us did, dozens of mass shootings, hundreds are dead, but that one lunatic went and tried to kill Kavanaugh. So, hey, it's all even, right?
So Cenk opens this segment with standard fare. He gives you some of the details related to this case. He talks about how, the right wing is going to use this as evidence of the left wing being violent, even though there's only 2 instances of the left wing being violent. even though obviously there are way more instances of that, and the Young Turks has covered and provided support for left-wing violence in the past. Remember the segment they did on Michael Forrest Reinl, the guy who assassinated Jay Danielson, a member of Patriot Prayer? They pretended like that was a self-defense case, even though on video this guy was hiding in a parking lot, stalking the guy, and then in the media later, he lied because he had seen on an Instagram post that this guy had a knife on him, which he actually did not have on him at the time. So here you have a guy saying he was threatening his friend with a knife that was not present on his person, based on the fact that he saw media reports from his Instagram the same day where he did have a knife in his hand. So this guy was a clear and obvious liar, and the Young Turks backed him. They downplayed his actions, and now Cenk is pretending like people don't remember this, and people don't remember the Black Lives Matter riots, which was probably the largest rioting situation ever in this country, and it was all left-wing violence. But sure, the right wing is just going to use this to call it even, whatever. But what Cenk does later on in this segment, where Cenk goes with this, is even more sinister. So you notice that the title of this video, which again, the story is a left-wing terrorist tried to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh because he was ginned up on hysteria about mass shootings and abortion, is about how the Republicans are hypocritical when it comes to gun violence. And what Cenk does halfway through this point is he starts talking about the Uvalde thing, and then he makes the story about that. And the reason why this is so sinister, the reason why this is such a vicious, nasty thing to do, the reason why this exposes that Cenk is actually kind of okay with political violence, and he doesn't really care about left-wing political violence, is because this was the motivating factor, or one of the motivating factors, behind the assassination attempt of Brett Kavanaugh. Think about it like this. We had an incident in Buffalo where some guy wrote a stupid manifesto about the Great Replacement, and for some reason, he thought Black Americans were immigrants and therefore the replacers in that situation. It was terrible, mixed up ideology, it was idiotic, the guy's a monster, and we talked about how the Buffalo cop that stood up in that situation should be recognized as a hero, the retired cop, because he tried to fire upon the shooter. Again, that will be linked in the description of this video. Now, if in that story, in that video, where I talked about what went down in Buffalo, I decided to do half the segment about how pragmatically, just pragmatically, right-wing violence is not okay, and the left wing's way more violent, and, you know, don't even worry about this, is not that big of a deal. And then the second half of the video, I started confirming the ideology of the person who perpetrated that violence. Wouldn't you think that would be a problem? Wouldn't you think that would be immoral if somebody started doing any kind of segment related to this, and they said, oh, you know what, but if you think about it, Black Americans who have been here from basically the jump with America, they're not really immigrants, most of them, are actually replacers, even though their population is in fact decreasing, and none of this ideology made any sense. Now, you shouldn't target any immigrant group, any ethnic group, any religious group, any group at all in the United States of America for violence, especially based on the erroneous notion that the immigrants are coming and they're always going to vote Democrat forever in perpetuity, because right now what we're seeing, just from a pragmatic sense, is Latinos in droves moving to the Republican Party. They're starting to look more and more like Italian immigrants. So the Democrats, even if you believe in this plot, are actually undercutting their own future base by importing these people. But Black Americans are not immigrants. They're also not an increasing population. They've been stable in the United States of America throughout the whole entire country, and they decrease, according to the census, from 13% to 12%. So everything about that specific attack is horrible and stupid, and pretending otherwise, or providing cover to it, or doing the story, or making the story about how the person behind whatever attack is actually kind of right when you think about it, is disgusting, and that's exactly what Cenk is doing. Cenk specifically highlights the same shooting that this guy who tried to assassinate Kavanaugh was angry about, and was one of the motivating factors of him attempting to assassinate a Supreme Court justice, in a story that is allegedly about the assassination of the Supreme Court justice. He turns Kavanaugh being targeted, which is due to the fact that the left published his address, celebrated people showing up to his house, has demonized him for years, into a story about how Republicans are hypocrites, because Cenk is actually okay with political violence. Let's be honest about what we're talking about here. Now, I know some people are going to say, oh, pointing out hypocrisy has no point, or whatever, but it is important to talk about it is important to acknowledge, beyond the fact that you're a hypocrite, I've won the debate intellectually, that we're not competing on fair grounds, and we need to acknowledge that these people are not acting in good faith, and we need to come out against them politically. We need to highlight this, and we need to point this out anytime we see people on the Republican side talking about how the random 200 people are an institutional failure because January 6th, when the left-wing media are trying to downplay this guy, and anybody on the left-wing side who actually says, hey, you know, violence against the Supreme Court justices, probably no good, get ratioed by their audience. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about the left wing being soft on a Supreme Court attempted assassination. Till next time.